So we ain't getting a Jack 4, but judging by the way how the Frontiers game failed, maybe that could have been Jack 4, just done differently? I don't know. Naughty Dog's moved on to other things quite some time. So it's time to go into my personal favorite trilogy, a set of games, the Jak and Daxter trilogy. I really enjoyed these games, and returning back to play them once again was just quite a blast. I had fun with each of the games, even though I did have some problems. But if there's one thing these games don't get talked about a lot is boss fights. Boss fights in these games are mixed qualities, but judging by them, yeah, you won't get much out of them considering that a certain someone did talk about a certain boss fight. But the quality of these fights can be either alright or just, in the middle. So today, I decided to do the favor of ranking each of these boss fights from my least favorite to my favorites. These boss fights will be based on my opinion on how much fun they are, how cool they are to fight against, and definitely posing a huge challenge. Each fight will be determined on how they're going to be ranked in terms of qualifying itself as a certified boss. Now, you might see some different opinions on here. If you see a boss fight that you think you're a huge fan of, I'll respect your opinion and you'll be happy to type them down in the comments. But in the meantime, let's get started with the adventure. So this thing counts as a boss? Well, people say it does. Anyway, I really don't care for the Dark Satellite. Judging by this being the first boss of Jak 3, this is the only boss I'm really not a huge fan of. All it does is just spin around in a circular laser that you can just stand under and just avoid its whipping tentacles and shoot at it. It's very simplistic and basic. Yeah, this is the first boss of the game, so of course I wasn't gonna expect quality out of first bosses, but there are some games that do first bosses just well. Heck, with this game made by the same developers who made Crash 3 and did a nice job with its first boss, you ain't gonna get much out of this thing. So yeah, it deserves to be forgotten in this dusty wasteland like it should. Here's another first boss, and it's from the first Jak and Daxter game. Yeah, I lost to this boss when I was young. Embarrassment moment right here. But the Dark Eco Plant is also another uninteresting boss fight. All it does is just try to bite at you and then send out enemies to attack you, which by the way aren't really a huge threat. Then it just puts out platforms for you to jump on and smack it in the face. And that's all it does. What makes it a step up is the level leading up to this boss is very interesting. Like, Forbidden Jungle does have some good atmosphere and build up, but this boss ain't gonna offer a lot, unless you love jumping on its head to get out those eco power cells, precursor cells. I don't even know. It's been a while since I played these games, so don't judge.
I'm through being your hired gun. Then it's war, isn't it?
I'm gonna be honest here, I really don't like the fight against Crew. His boss fight in Jak 2 is just, not really fun. You just shoot out like electrifying clones of him that are just everywhere and can be a pain to take out since you have to use the shotgun to do it. And they spawn at a rapid rate, and trying to avoid them can be a bit annoying since they spawn around you. It just becomes a very tedious boss fight since all you're doing is just getting rid of his clones. Crew might as well not even exist there in the first place since he's a total wuss. Seriously, once you're shooting him, he just staggers and staggers. So there's kind of not a lot you'll get out of this guy. I think it's better off just sleeping in the end, if you ask me.
Out of your misery.
So we have the first boss of Jak 2. It is a step up over the previous first bosses in terms of quality, but then again it's the first boss and it's pretty easy, so yeah. Baron Praxis brings out his mecha machine in for combat, and seeing how it does with its machine guns by being avoided very easily and trying to shoot at him. Yeah, the first part of the fight isn't really a big issue. What makes him a step up over the other bosses is he has multiple different sections you have to go through by jumping across platforms, and he'll change up his attacks. Second part, he'll bring out missiles that can be a bit annoying to dodge, but still manageable. Then there's the final part, which really fiery mini tornadoes. Come on, you bring out a mech and this is what you have? This phase was kind of annoying due to the annoying camera angle, and he charges at you after he's done with certain attacks. He is a bit of a step up over the first bosses, but then again, this is a first boss, so it really isn't saying much in quality. Well, this is surprising. A final boss this low on the list again? Well, it is a bit surprising, but Metalhead Leader Core is my least favorite final boss in the trilogy. I'll give it this, the build-up and suspense behind the twist is actually really good. They made it to where Core isn't really their leader and trying so hard to make it not obvious until the final twist, where you get to see that he's the one responsible for leading the Metalhead army. But even with that twist, this boss fight is just not really that great. He's up there on his thing and he just sends out enemies and shoots out projectiles at you. You can easily wipe out his first two phases with your special attack before anything else could even come into the battlefield and annoy you. Those little pesky bugs make this boss fight so annoying, and trying to take care of them is a pain. Then there's the final phase, which is a bit of a step up, but you can just avoid his melees by just barrel rolling away, and he does have a shockwave blast. This phase is a bit annoying because trying to deal with a wonky camera angle and trying to shoot him is annoying since he refuses to stop moving. Then again, I like it when he moves, but trying to shoot him is just a pain. So make sure you save up your Dark Jak mode for this final phase, since he does take a lot more effort with his final phase than his first two phases. Then he grows wings and commits die. This is the only final boss I don't really like, but man, just not a huge fan of this fight. Also, fun fact, this boss reuses the same music as the first boss. So yeah, not much out of a quality. Up next we have the Precursor Robot. No, not that one. This one, on the other hand. This fight is pretty good and definitely a challenging boss. Kinda wish it was the first boss. This boss fight starts off pretty simple with him using his laser attacks and sending out enemies to try to stop you. Then he'll use more of his lasers to create pillars that you have to jump on to shoot the minecarts while he tries to shoot at you to make sure you don't destroy those minecarts. After setting one off, he just comes back like it's nothing and just shrugs it off. Then his attacks get much more rapidly faster, and more dodges will be required to this fight. And then you have to deal with the pillars and everything else coming after you. This is a really decent boss fight, and I kinda wish it was the first boss of the game instead of that satellite thing. But this boss fight ain't the most challenging, but it's definitely one of my favorites up there. So you guys probably will see this boss fight pretty soon. Definitely a start to one of my favorite games in the trilogy. Admittedly, this is probably the best boss in Jak 2. The second Baron fight, it is definitely the most fun one. Baron Praxis brings out a new mech machine where he'll send out more enemies for you to deal with. By the way, you have to use your weapons, don't use melee. Then he'll send out bombs where you have to hit them back and it will take damage to him while he tries to get the crystal out of the statue. It can be a bit tough if you're overwhelmed by many different enemies and trying to aim the bomb attack. Yeah, you're gonna have a tough time with this fight. After all that, he finally gets the crystal and uses it as a weapon to destroy your platforms. And then you have to repeat the process of avoiding his attacks engine style and of hitting him with the bombs. This is a pretty tough fight and definitely the most enjoyable one in the game. Such a shame that Baron here had to take the crystal and run off. But still, I appreciate this boss and it's definitely a step up over the first Baron Praxis fight. So I applaud the sequel for having a good boss like him. Now we get to the lava monster, Claw. This big boy over here was going to be mentioned in a cutscene that got cut out of the game due to time constraints. But here we have him terrorizing the city, and now it's up to us to try to stop him. The fight itself is a pretty challenging boss fight since it's the second boss of the game. All you have to do is avoid the lava rocks while he's sending them after you and try to hop on those platforms and avoid touching the lava because that's instant kill. After all that, there's a bridge edge that you have to walk across, but he'll send out boulders to try to get into your way where you have to avoid them. Then you'll pick up the yellow eco power-up, send some fireballs at him, and just see that boulder bonk his head completely. Then you have to hop on and repeat the process again, only this time the bridges now get a bit smaller and tight with the platforming, and his attacks get quite a bit rapid, and this fight definitely has some good music and atmosphere. My problem with this boss is it's a bit too repetitive. You just repeat the same process of beating him over and over and over again. It's definitely a really decent challenge, but kind of wish there was a little bit more to this fight than just avoiding boulders and bopping him on the head 3 times. But that's how things go in Jak and Daxter. I'm good with transitions, guys.
Maybe a rock, or a floating puddle of slag, or nothing at all. Complete oblivion! So hard to choose.
I won't let you do this!
So we have our first encounter with our main antagonist of Jak 3, Cyber Arrow. This guy is not messing around. He definitely will test your skill on your platforming and how you're gonna handle hordes of enemies. He'll start off by sending bombs at you, which can easily be avoided. Then he'll send out hordes of enemies to try to overwhelm you, but if you have good weapons in your arsenal, you'll definitely clear them out. All you have to do is smack the bombs under his platforms that he's standing on and do some damage to him. After each hit, he'll get rid of a lot of your different platforms and make the fight a little bit harder to avoid his attacks. This becomes tough, especially in the final part where you have to deal with enemies while dealing with very little platforming involved in this fight. Thankfully he doesn't attack, making this fight a little bit more tolerable, but man, this guy is a pretty tough challenge for a first encounter with the antagonist. I'll just be honest though, I'm really not a huge fan of Cyber Arrow. Really don't like him as our main villain. But at least his boss fight is definitely one of the best parts of Jak 3. Definitely a build up from one of my favorite levels in the game. Yeah, it may seem a little bit odd, but I put the final boss of Jak 1 on a bit higher than I would think I would. Yeah, it's not the most challenging, but it is my personal favorite final boss in the trilogy. You get a fight against the precursor robot, like for the first time, in an unfinished state. And this guy, while not definitely the most challenging, he does offer a bit variety in his attacks. He'll start off pretty easy where he'll send out enemies to try to swarm you, and send out this bomb where you have to avoid it by using the blue eco and the jump pad. Then after that, he will use his arm cannons to send out shockwave bombs that you have to avoid, and use his giant cannon to try to shoot you while the middle of your platform is breaking up, and you gotta avoid jumping in there because that's instant kill. The music itself is pretty decent for this fight, not the best, but definitely the most decent. After destroying most of the robot, you'll get a cutscene showcasing about light eco, and you have to pick it up before all these bombs set off and kill you instantly. Once you get it, you finally get the finishing blow and destroy the robot for good. This is a decent final boss, and that's what I like. It's a pretty simple fight, but it definitely gets the job done well as a final boss. And that's what I would like to see. But I'm sure there is a final boss that is a bit of a step up of this fight. And you guys can probably take a guess who the obvious boss fight is in all of Jak and Daxter history. So I prepared the list for the number 1 very best. You can tell that picking the best boss fight from this series is gonna be really hard and tough, and it's the Darkmaker Terraformer! Why am I even bothering at this point? Yeah, it may seem like an obvious and predictable choice that I would pick the final boss of Jak 3 since I already discussed about this boss fight before, but can you really blame me? This is the best and most epic boss fight in the series, and one of the most challenging final bosses seen in video game history. Giant walker roaming around on the entire wastelands. You got to destroy the legs completely and hop on board the machine, take care of a whole bunch of enemies, avoid its laser attacks, and the music is great. This is one of the most challenging and epic final bosses in video game history. I discussed about this fight in my best S final boss list that's already made in my channel, so yeah, I probably would be repeating myself, but then again, this boss fight is great. It's a multi-phase final battle that is quite long, quite the challenge, definitely worthy of the top spot. It's a perfect end to the amazing trilogy, and this is what I liked about this final boss. I wasn't expecting myself to really be a huge fan of this boss fight when I first played Jak 3, but playing through the game, I can see why this boss fight is great. I just kind of wish a lot of people would talk about this fight because it definitely deserves itself for being worthy as one of the best. Not only is it one of the best final bosses that has a multi-phase battle that poses a really good challenge with its variety of attacks and how you deal with it, but it's definitely one of the best in video game history, and I applaud Jak 3 for ending on such a high note. Man, working on this list was quite a doozy. These boss fights in Jak and Daxter series definitely are a mixed quality. It's unique to see how Naughty Dog put their effort in with a few boss fights right before they moved on to other series. It ain't like they had experience with boss fights. They definitely offered a few memorable ones from the Crash Bandicoot trilogy, and a lot of people really talked about those fights before. So you definitely can see. Now then, as for Uncharted, that'll probably wait for another time, who knows.